Professor Lambden, in your opening statement, you mentioned that personal data is combined into dossiers for government use and for integration with designer data companies specializing in data products. How does personal data flow to larger brokerage firms, and how is it combined into marketable packages for law enforcement and government entities?
So there are a series of different pathways. There's no one way that these data sets get into these dossiers, but there are major companies that collect data from over 10,000 sources. And those companies began as public records collectors. So they would collect things like DMV rolls, voting rolls, public records that were already available and accessible. And then they just kept kind of accumulating more and more sources, kind of to what Elizabeth just mentioned about how if the government wants to get data from a particular entity or a particular app or particular data company or source, rather than selling it directly to the government, if the company or the app or whatever the entity is sells it to one of these major data brokers like a LexisNexis or an Oracle or one of these large data dossier companies, then those data dossier companies will license data streams to the government agency that contracts with them. So that's kind of how our personal data from, say, using Facebook or using the GPS on our phone makes its way to the government. It gets collected piece by piece and then placed in a large data dossier associated with your name.
Thank you. Professor Wexler, in cases where prosecutors fail to collect Brady information, what prevents the defense counsel from simply purchasing potentially exculpatory evidence from data brokers themselves?
Thank you for the question, Chairman Nadler. Beyond financial barriers and the possibility defense counsel might not know exculpatory information exists, like flaws in the data collection method, some companies refuse to sell data or investigative software to anyone other than law enforcement customers. So they just flat out say no. In addition, data companies don't generally sell information about flaws in their methods. They're likely instead to claim that information as a trade secret and refuse to even disclose it subject to a subpoena. Finally, some privacy statutes, including the SCA as interpreted by the courts today, bars private entities from disclosing some information to defense counsel, even if there is a subpoena and a court orders that the information is necessary to the administration of justice.
Thank you. Chairman Goodlatte, there is a disturbing lack of transparency when it comes to how Americans' detailed personal information reaches law enforcement or the government, whether it's through data broker purchases or geofence warrants. Are law enforcement and the federal government buying their way around due process protections? And do you believe that was the intention of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act when it was first passed?
I don't think the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, when it was first passed, contemplated this being an issue at all, since at that time, access to information in emails was probably the primary thing that could be obtained. And as has been mentioned, the evolution of the internet has been so dramatic since then that automatically information of all sorts is being gathered, and people don't even realize how much information is gathered. I counted yesterday that I have 160 apps on my phone. Probably half of those are tracking various pieces of information about me that's being stored somewhere and it's available to be sold to somebody. And as I said in my testimony, when it goes to the government, I think they are indeed going around the intent of the Fourth Amendment when they're allowed to buy that, when otherwise they would be required to have a warrant.
Thank you. Professor Lambden, similar to predictive policing, can analysis of these complicated data sets predict who is likely to get pregnant, when they are likely to get pregnant, or similarly, who is likely to seek out an abortion, whether it's based on age, demographics, income, location, or other factors?
Absolutely, yeah. Predictive analytics can be built to serve all sorts of needs, and there is so much data, there's such a wealth of data available about our internet searches, who we've been messaging, what about our period trackers, all sorts of health apps, that it would be very easy to make that kind of a predictive analytics system.
Thank you. I thank our witnesses for their excellent testimony. Before I yield back, without objection, I will enter into the record a statement for the record by Caitlin Chin, Fellow of the Strategic Technologies Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.